Hey, it's David. Let's get this seat finally installed on the bike. After much fluffing and fanning about with this seat, today is the day that it goes on the bike. Not finally, completely, still a bit of dressing, painting, blah blah blah, but today it goes on the bike and we move on. So let's get this done. So at the front of this plate for the right hand side, I've bent a piece of strap and I've just tacked it on, and I've ground away the side to try and give it relief and a bit of the corner. What I'm thinking, and this is why I'm very much testing them, is to see whether or not I can use these plates to create captive nuts for the main seat, because at the moment I would say every time I come to bolt the seat back in, about 50% of the time I will drop at least one of the nuts, which will then fall down into the bike and may or may not reappear again afterwards. But it's a question of whether or not I can get these in here with a nut on such that they'll lock in. Now it seems the front one did. So, test fitting. There's hours and hours spent tweaking stuff to make it fit, and bending brackets, drilling holes for brackets and so forth. Where we are now is that there's a nut welded at the end of this bracket, so this now bolts down onto this piece of steel, so this keeps the front of this firm. I've made up a bracket, but the other end of that bracket has a nut welded onto it, and this is now fixed into here. Then I'm going to disconnect the battery again, and I'm going to run a spot weld down into that bracket there, and then we'll find out whether or not I can actually get this off, or whether I'll need to get the angle grinder out and cut that bracket off in order to get this out. So I'm going to bend this, weld this, and then we'll see. Okay, I didn't bolt that one in. This one's got quite tight. Now, so this is why I want the nut plates, because trying to catch the nuts and stop them falling out is a real fun game. And these other threads are a little bit long too. Yeah, don't know what's going on with the thread on this one. It's quite tight in the nut. Right, only way in and out. There you go. This is why we need nut plates. All looking good so far. So this is what I was afraid of, and even if it is possible to get one out, can I get two out? Yeah, that's actually quite tight in there, but there may be a magic way of just doing it. Well, there we go. So I think I'm going to need to trim this down a little bit. when I went to grind the weld smooth on the bracket here, the bracket just popped off. Although it had welded to a limited extent to the bracket, there was no penetration through to the actual plate itself that I was welding to. So I've whacked the welder up to max and redone it, and I've added this little side tab there, and that looks much better to me. Let's see if it's any easier this time. I think actually I've welded this bracket on slightly in the wrong position. It's a little annoying, but it's just one of those things. Okay, so I think we need a little more relieving here. So the first, I'm not quite sure what to call it, oil tank plate is done. It's in place. It's the most difficult one because you've got the plastic box underneath that it comes up really close to the top. It's the top of the sort of battery compartment. Could cut it off, but I'm not going to. I'm going to work around it. It just makes getting that plate in and out quite stiff. But with that one done so that it works, let's get the second one made up and mounted on the bike. I've put the plate in place, as you can see, so that gives a pretty good idea of the finished look of it. Now when I say I put it in place, what that means is that I've welded a bracket up here, as I did it on the other side. It's just a tiny little bracket, completely undressed at this point in time, but it has a captive nut on the back of it, which means I can now bolt down both bolts of the front of the seat mount into captive nuts. What I need to do now is do the same on the back end. So you can see the second one has a bracket. Welding's not too attractive on that one, but not finished yet, so we'll see what happens to that. So I need to make that bracket for there, so that this is fixed in place and has a captive nut on the back of for this bolt to bolt into. So I've cut a piece of strap, marked approximately where the bends need to go. So now I need to do a little bit of bending and make this fit. So it will come down like this and across. And the reason that I'm leaving this mount visible is that I'm trying to simulate a mount for an oil tank. So an oil tank should be bolted up to something, so this will give the look of that. and a few minutes of backwards and forwards gives a bracket that looks something like this. So quite hard to actually figure out except by doing it. Now I need to drill a hole in here so that I can bolt it in place, and then we can mark it up and mock it, or get it ready, I said not mock it up, get it ready for welding in place. And it has to be done on the bike, because it's just trying to mark it up on the bike, take it off the bike, too many variables are going to change. So this has to be welded or tacked in place on the bike and taken off and welded up properly. Before we can mark it up, we need to jig everything into place, and in this case the jig is the actual bracket, and making it line up. This is slightly dropped down, that's got to come down, so that's got to be flat against there and flat against there. So bracket is now cleaned and ready for welding. Top oil tank covers are now bolted into place, and with the benefit that they act as captive nuts for this top mount, so I can just screw it into place without having to worry about dropping nuts down into the engine and suspension unit and then never seeing them again. So let's see what it looks like with the saddle on, but it's pretty much hidden the spring, which is what I wanted, and without doing that flat plate across the top that everybody seems to do. So that's good. Let's get the saddle on. Right, saddle is a little further forward than I would like, so that's something I need to address, but that's relatively simple. So I just need to slot out that in there and we can move it back. It's hard to visualize exactly what it's looking with all the rubbish behind it in the shed, but of course what matters is what happens when you sit on it. Now, judging by the mirrors, I would say seat height is about the same as it was with the stock seat. I've got the same view in my mirrors that I had before, which means that my seating position has remained unchanged, which is basically what I wanted, because so this isn't the slammed bobber, this is the classic bobber where I'm keeping the same riding position, which means that I can do more than 5 or 10 miles in one go, and I can ride this for as long as I've got fuel in the tank without needing to get off and stretch my legs, bend my knees and all the other rubbish that goes with bikes that don't actually fit you. So test ride, otherwise as it stands this looks pretty much as I visualised it. So all the plates are made up, everything is mocked up, tested and roughly shaped to fit. But over the last few weeks it's been getting a bit wet out, we've had some rain and I've been bringing wet bikes into the shed, and I've started to get a bit of rust bloom on the seat mounting parts. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to blow a coat of black paint over it. Don't want to do it at this point in time because I've got to strip it back off again to finish finishing it, but I need to do it, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to blow those over and put them on the bike and let's have a look at them. With a quick coat of paint on the parts, dried and mounted, this is what it looks like. Now I haven't actually painted the seat itself because there's still some more work to be done to that. But this is what the plates look like when they're mounted. It's quite dark in here, I think, so I'm not quite sure how well this is showing up. This blends in quite well. It's a similar, well, it's black and it's slightly glossy, so it's pretty good to the seat. I say hardware is going to get changed out, but not just yet, because I want to build up and place an order for that. It's simply cheaper on postage and stuff to get that. So that's chopped out, so we can see there's plenty of room here. I need to slot this hole out to move this seat backwards. I need to finish trimming and stuff here. I need to plate this before I slot it, because I need to add some strength back in, and that will allow these to clear this lip when they come down. At this point in time, although it doesn't look like it, they do tend to come down in a bit of a curve, which is what you expect, because the whole thing is going to be moving down in a curve. And they do just clip this here, which is obviously just a bit closer than this gap here. So a little bit of finishing work to here, but otherwise that's done, and frankly that's as much as I'm going to do with it for now. I'm going to move on to the next stage. And the next stage will be looking at the rear lights for the bike, but I'll talk more about that next time. So thanks very much for coming along on this voyage today in the shed with me, and I will catch you guys again soon.